I'm James Brierton. This week on the Carolina Weather Group, the storm that so desperately wanted to be Helene, but never quite achieved it. But the real impacts left behind by this tropical weather system that brought heavy rain and historic flooding to parts of the Carolinas. That's this week on the Carolina Weather Group. It's Wednesday, September 18th, 2024. James Brierton in Charlotte, streaming with you live on the Carolina Weather Group Facebook and YouTube page. Hello to our audio listeners as well on our podcast feed. Well, the storm wanted to be called Helene. At one point, the National Hurricane Center had it forecast to become a tropical storm, but as Shakespeare once said, what's in a name? Even though the storm never quite reached official tropical storm status, or even tropical depression status for that matter, it left behind real world impacts, some of which won't be quickly forgotten. Upwards of 20 inches of rain in some place. And while many of us might have been just going, yeah, it's raining a lot, some people are going to remember this storm for quite a while, name or no name. Well, our guest this week does have a name, and we welcome him into the Carolina Weather Group from Wilmington. It's Bob Bright, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Wilmington. And Bob, thanks so much for making time with us on this Wednesday night. I know your office, like so many of the offices across the Carolinas, had a very busy week. We appreciate your time.
Sure, good to be here.
So I guess just set it up for us, if you will. I know a lot of folks in your community will remember this storm. Other parts of the Carolinas will remember it too. But what I experienced in Charlotte, maybe about 2 inches of rain, enough that I didn't have to water the grass for a good week or two. But what you guys experience in some of your communities in that greater Wilmington area is pretty historic through some measure. Could you recap it for us?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, we just want to say, our thoughts go out to those affected. Obviously, it was a pretty significant event. Maybe not overall for a large area, but obviously in those areas that were uh, most impacted, certainly significant impacts to them. And you can see there on your screen the radar loop. Fairly narrow band of tropical moisture just came into essentially southern New Hanover County and northern Brunswick County, and pretty much just continued to funnel in a lot of moisture. The amounts really added up, comparable to some of our bigger events,
Sure.
heavy rainfall events, tropical storms, and even hurricanes that we've had on record. So, um, uh, one of my fellow meteorologists at the office, Tim Armstrong, who knows a lot about the climate and does great work looking into the numbers. The amounts that we saw really, as you're seeing there, really in that area, were basically 1 in 200 to 1 in 1,000 year type of events. So definitely pretty rare.
Wow, absolutely. Yeah. And to read off at least some of these numbers pretty loosely for anyone who might be listening with us, your scale here goes up to 20 inches. And we can see some of your communities, especially on the south side of Wilmington, as you mentioned, got those 20-inch rainfall rainfall total accumulations. And we'll talk about some of the other parts of the Carolinas coming up later in our program. But I think you guys really were the main bullseye, at least on Monday. We'll talk more about Tuesday with some of our other guests coming up in the next half hour. But these rainfall radar estimated events, as we were watching them unfold, it really seemed like your area had kind of become ground zero. Can you talk about some of the local storm reports or some of the impacts that the communities experienced as a result of this historic rain?
Yeah, I mean, you know, really a lot of uh, roads impacted, road closures. We saw, even some roads being washed out. A lot of uh, rescues had to be made because people were essentially just caught because the rain was just coming down so fast and furious. You could see, I believe this is in Carolina Beach. Just a prodigious amount of rain in a short amount of time, and no matter where you're at, that's going to lead to some flooding problems. So, overall, again, it was fairly contained to tens of miles of square miles, but certainly just very unusual amounts and rates. You get, like I said, you get that amount of rain. Um, even here along the coast where a lot of the soils are sandy, still can't run off and drain very well. So it tends to run off. So unfortunately, a lot of people in those areas were impacted. And, to be honest, I mean, some maybe ray of sunshine in all this is that it didn't occur a little, farther north in Wilmington proper, or even a little bit farther south in Myrtle Beach, where it's a little more urban and more populated. So
Yeah, we'll take any silver linings I suppose we could get. Some of those pictures, though, still showing water up to car tires or engine blocks. Some of them showing water in sunrooms. I'm sure people who are closer or on a more low-lying area got that water even faster coming in. If I was a resident or even a tourist in Carolina Beach or any of these other communities, what tools or information would have been at hand for me from your office, from broadcast media, that would have been alerting me to this type of ongoing flooding?
yeah, so I know leading up to the event, we were pushing out forecasts and briefings to our core partners like the emergency managers and other officials in the media. And um, you know, while there was quite a bit of uncertainty in the strength and the how organized the storm might be and what name it might get or not get, we still were thinking that there was going to be some potentially significant impacts. And we had a variety of uh, watches, warnings, and advisories up for you know um, gale warnings offshore and flood watches inland and high risk of rip currents. And we were still expecting some significant impacts. So once obviously that got going and the rain started to come down, um, especially on Monday, then that's when we kicked into convective short-term mode and it started issuing the flash flood warnings and those products. But like I said, I mean, we had a variety of products and forecasts out that suggested the potential for a lot of rain. Of course, the exact amounts we didn't nail down, but we had 5 to 10 inches of rain with locally higher amounts generally forecast. And we also had a tropical storm warning in effect. The Hurricane Center, once they started to issue their potential tropical cyclone, they classified it as a potential tropical cyclone on Sunday. They began to issue those forecasts, the cones and all that, and we put up a tropical storm warning. So there were warnings in place, and try to get the word out that there were going to be some significant impacts.
I think you hit on something that was a key there, Bob, which is that those tropical storm warnings were in place. And while there's some joking and some technicalities on why this storm wasn't ever named Helene, and that name's still on the roster for the next named storm, its official name of the storm that impacted us this week is potential tropical cyclone 8. And as I understand it, and you can confirm or deny, that potential tropical cyclone verbiage that the National Hurricane Center utilizes for a system like this, that allows you guys then to put those tropical storm warnings into place as opposed to waiting around for a name. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. Basically, we've seen storms over the last several years that try to intensify real quickly, and they're close to shore. So unfortunately, that doesn't give a lot of lead time. And in the past, the Hurricane Center and the Weather Service couldn't put up those tropical headlines until it was officially a tropical cyclone. Tropical cyclone being any type of tropical entity like a tropical depression, tropical storm, or hurricane. And so having the ability now for the Hurricane Center to issue these potential tropical cyclone advisories and then put up the tropical headlines. And again, they're only for wind, and we have other headlines potential for storm surge and coastal flooding, but that allows them to basically put those watches and warnings out. In this case, we didn't have a watch because it was within 36 hours of impact, so we went straight to a warning. So
Yeah, I think two things I'll hit upon, which you mentioned, Bob, with the potential tropical cyclone opportunities that system allows us. One, of course, as you mentioned, that so many of these seem to rapidly intensify just as they nearly come on shore. I think it's something like 6 of the last 8 storm systems have had PTCs this season along with them, but also the fact that um, meteorologists in general, right? That in 2024, technology wise, we've gotten really good with that forecast path. I think it's that intensity thing, if I can speak frankly for all of us, right? That's still kind of like is the part that has a lot of opportunity left with it because we have an idea of a lot of times where these storms are going to go, but it's that intensity factor that I think gets really hard to pin down so far. I'm just wondering, as a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, what's that been like for you when you're trying to build a forecast? What challenges face you and your colleagues with intensity? What opportunities are there? What tools are at your disposal to help you guide that part of the forecasting?
yeah, so the like you said, the track forecasting has gotten really good essentially over the last several years and decades. We've made big strides in track forecasting. Um, the timing may be a little quicker, slower. That still has a little bit of work to be done on, but the intensity, because a lot of the times the intensity is driven and caused by changes on like smaller scale processes, like whether it's what water temperatures it's over, the upper level conditions, um, wind shear and things a little bit on a smaller scale. Um, that is harder for the models to resolve, and so the intensity definitely poses some challenges. But even in some, every storm is unique too. So
Yeah,
um, that's hard. But the uh, the fact that you know the intensity alone that the Hurricane Center and Weather Service as a whole projects and forecasts, that doesn't really tell you the whole story a lot of times because the storm, like in this case, um, it was pretty disorganized overall, and the impacts
sure.
are spread out over a large area. So people get hung up on what the peak intensity is and where it's supposed to go in general, but there's still we want to try and reiterate that it's really the impacts, and it doesn't matter you know if the storm's really well organized and a lot of that strong wind and rain is like closer to the center, or if it's spread out over a large area. And in this case, the center actually came ashore south of where the heavier rain was, um, down closer to Myrtle Beach. I think it was near the state line somewhere technically, but obviously on the north and east side, which is typically generally the worst, area to be in a storm. This wasn't tropical, but any kind of cyclone that has that rotation counterclockwise, you're going to get those winds streaming in off the ocean. And basically, this fact that this storm was moving so slow, and that feeder band set up and just kept, like I said, kept going over the same areas, and that's why we saw the prodigious amounts, more than what we were thinking. As far as tools, you know, there was mention and there was forecast of heavy rain, like I said, and several inches of rain. We generally follow the Weather Prediction Center, who does the rainfall forecast. But it's hard to predict extreme events. It really is.
Hmm.
We don't want to come across as hyping and all that kind of stuff either. So, we try to have a reasonable approach, and those rainfall amounts are kind of generally averaged amounts. It's not like, that's why we always say with locally higher amounts, because, oftentimes you will get some of this type of training and people, places will get heavy, more amounts in those areas. And so, you know, we were kind of talking about, I think the Weather Projection Center had extreme rainfall outlook, a moderate, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So there was mention of that, and there was some predictability to the heavy rainfall. But again, you know, you don't want to cry wolf too many times.
Yeah. I'll bring in my colleague, Frank Strait, who's joining us from Columbia, listening in on the conversation. Frank, how are you tonight? Oh, let me unmute Frank. How about now, Frank?
I have to unmute myself first. Oops. I pulled a Scotty since he's not here.
It's like Fort Knox. There's
Somebody's
two
gotta do it.
keys. We got to do both unmutes at the same time. All right, go ahead, Frank.
All right. Anyway, yeah. Hi, James. Hi, Bob. Anyway, there was just one comment I wanted to make here, and this business of predicting the weather, some of us might make it look easy, but it's not, and it's even harder when you're trying to do something like predict a storm that hasn't even formed yet, particularly when there's any kind of tropical characteristics involved. In this particular case, it was sort of tropical, not really enough to call it a tropical or even subtropical cyclone, subtropical being a hybrid between
I think
the
both of you would
mid-latitude
take
storm.
issues to the words I've put at the bottom of the screen to describe tonight's conversation. Then.
Yeah, that's right.
We could debate that in a minute.
We try to put the weather into this bin, tropical cyclone, subtropical cyclone, mid-latitude, but the weather sometimes does something, it does whatever it wants. Okay,
tropical like.
Yeah, sort of like tropical, not really. Mid-latitude storm with a ton of tropical moisture. You've heard the term atmospheric river before. This doesn't really qualify. Atmospheric creek, maybe. But even with a small feed of tropical moisture that's almost stationary over you, when you have a very dynamic storm system going on, you can still put down a lot of rain, and that's kind of what happened in this situation. And as Bob said, there's some level of predictability there, but these extreme events are really hard to come by, even when you have models giving you some guidance saying the extreme event can happen. And if you go back and review all the model runs that we had for the storm in the 4 or 5 day lead up to it, occasionally the GFS would put out some bonkers rainfall amount. There was one run it had a few days out that had like 24 inches of rain somewhere, but that was down in Charleston. It wasn't where it actually happened. And there were a couple of other runs that had some pretty extreme amounts too. But we're not going to get great guidance on a developing storm when it hasn't really developed yet. That's especially true for tropical storms, and you have to keep that in your thought process and keep your expectations in line with that as well. It may be 2024, and most of the time we really do a good job of predicting the weather, but there are certain situations like what was going on with this somewhat tropical but not really tropical storm that we were dealing with that made it very difficult to get right. So we knew there'd be a lot of rain, but there was still ended up being almost 3 times what we thought it would, and it ended up being catastrophic in a fairly small area. Over a larger area, it's the if you average it out over a larger area, then what was predicted is a lot closer to reality. But these guys at the National Weather Service and your TV friendly neighborhood meteorologists and other people in the private sector, they can put their heart and soul into every forecast, and 92 or 3% of the time they're going to give you a great forecast, but the 7% does bite you in the rear end sometimes, and
complexities,
situations where that kind of happened.
Yeah. I have one more question for Bob, and then Frank, I'm sure we have more to explain on potential tropical cyclones versus not. But Bob, before we let you go, and I'm sorry to cut you off, Frank, but I just want to ask Bob this question and then let him be on his way. You mentioned some of those warnings that you guys put up, the National Hurricane Center in the second half of this hurricane season using their new experimental forecast cone that actually displays those on a map. Can you just give us a quick synopsis of their updated cone and how that actually allows you guys to paint those not only coastal, but further inland impacts too?
Yeah. So basically what the new graphic shows is, there's the Hurricane Center essentially puts out the warning right along the immediate coast, and then it's up to the local WFO, the forecast office, to extend that, inland or into the offshore waters as needed. In this case, we really didn't extend the warnings inland from the coast based on the winds that occurred. Maybe we should have, but obviously, like after every big event, we're going to take a look back and see what things we could have done differently. But obviously, the issue was more the rainfall in this event, anyway. But that new graphic essentially will show wherever we have tropical storm watches and warnings or hurricane watches and warnings, and those are just for the wind now. That's been changed for a while. Where those areas, this is a good example from Ian last year. So this graphic will essentially show all areas under the gun, not just along the immediate coast for the wind hazards.
Perfect. So somebody sitting in Charlotte tonight, I appreciate having that information on the almighty cone, which I know has a lot of social science that goes into it as well, too. Bob, we appreciate the work that you and your colleagues, not only in your office, but across North Carolina and South Carolina and our country have been doing. I know you guys are up around the clock, and appreciate you taking time on this Wednesday night to chat with us here at the Carolina Weather Group.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. And good luck to everyone that's dealing with the storm.
Thank you, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
I know Frank here in just a moment is going to talk a little bit more about what's on deck. We have a question from our live chat asking us what exactly will be coming up the next few days, as the models have been hinting at. But Frank, I know you were just beginning to talk about a little bit of what is tropical and what is not tropical. I have a brief explainer that I shot with Chris Mulcahy at WCNC coming up in a little bit. But let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think even as I'm not a meteorologist, I'm a weather nerd who has the opportunity to talk on this show and in other places. You are a meteorologist, Frank, and I know Scotty is, and others on our show. I struggled as a storyteller this week trying to figure out what my headlines were, right? Helene to be, storm to soon be tropical storm. No, wait, now it's going to maybe be a depression. No, wait. I mean, its official title was not easy to convey, in my opinion, to the general public, right? Potential tropical cyclone 8, which left me with the what do I conversationally call this? And I do think, right or wrong, I was kind of leaning on tropical weather, because I was just like this broad umbrella term to be like, those are some tropical moisture downpours impacts. The impacts are the same as if we kind of got a tropical storm, but we didn't. I wanted to say that and get back to your thought too a little bit on it wasn't quite tropical. Tell us why in your meteorological mind, Frank, for anyone who might be going, well, it certainly felt pretty tropical.
Yeah, well, the situation here it has to do with the structure of the storm from a meteorological standpoint and the technical details there, in that this storm was not purely driven by the processes that tropical cyclones are fueled by. That is, the evaporation of warm water, or of evaporation coming from warm ocean waters that condenses, puts more heat in the atmosphere, causes thunderstorms to go into sort of a feedback loop to sustain themselves and over a long period of time, eventually causing a low pressure area to form, eventually causing rotation to happen. And again, as it feeds back on itself, this whole system becomes more intense and you're getting a hurricane. Not enough of that was really going on to call this a tropical storm, or even the hybrid subtropical, the technical term, storm that would result in it getting a name just like a tropical storm. Instead, the storm structure was that of a mid-latitude cyclone. That being said, the actual impacts were essentially the same as a tropical storm. We had high winds. I think we had a gust of 77 miles an hour reported at Southport. I don't know if that was considered valid or not, but in numerous other places saw wind gusts of of 50 miles an hour or higher. I know that the Wilmington airport, I think, had a 60 gust, and I think another spot over there, Wrightsville Beach or something, had a 67 gust, and there was a gust like 48, even up to Florence, and Fayetteville had gusts to like 45 or 48 or something.
Very
I don't
tropical
remember.
storm like Gus.
Right. It was and because it's warm and muggy, and there's thunderstorms going on, and there's flooding rainfall, and there's these strong winds going on, the casual observer says, well, this is a tropical storm. Well, yeah, kind of just the same as a tropical storm. And that's the good thing about the way the National Weather Service is handling these situations by calling them potential tropical cyclones, because there was a chance it became an actual tropical cyclone or the hybrid subtropical storm, which would have gotten a name as well. But in the end, that didn't happen. It maintained the structure of a mid-latitude storm. But because we can call it a potential tropical storm, even if it doesn't become one, you can still handle it by saying, okay, we're going to put out a tropical storm warning for this coastline and some inland areas. And that allows people to say, well, a tropical storm's coming. Even if
I think that's the most important part to take away, right? Is to look for those things and not second guess them. Oh, is it not? Oh, well, I have a tropical storm warning. I should act as if it is. And the other thing I was thinking, as you were discussing before, about like how it never, I don't use air quotes here, officially formed, right? It didn't form into anything with a closed off area of circulation. It was far cry from having anything even resembling an eye. You talked about the models, and the models were really struggling, because we always use this analogy that weather forecasting is like trying to drive a car from California to New York. You have an idea of how long that's going to take, but as you're making those days long trips, oh, there's construction, oh, there's an accident, let me turn here, let me go there. So the analogy is always, oh, this is kind of the path it's more or less going to take, and they'll be fine-tuning as we get closer. But in this case, you were driving from blank to New York because the thing never formed. You didn't actually know, in this analogy, where you were starting from.
Right. And that's all these things are also make the forecast more challenging. Is this going to behave like a tropical storm? Is it going to behave like a mid-latitude storm? It ended up behaving like a tropical storm, even though it wasn't built like one.
Yeah.
And that's and the challenges of relating that to the public are there. It's good that we can say, okay, the storm's coming. It's going to be like a tropical storm. Might actually be one. Think in terms of, okay, prepare like a tropical storm's coming. And the system we have now allows us to do that. But as you alluded to at the beginning of this conversation, it sort of makes the prelude and explaining what's about to happen a little more difficult. And I heard a wide range of headlines. Some of them just said Tropical Storm Helene on the way,
which would be wrong.
Which is wrong. That didn't happen, and that's going to confuse people when maybe next weekend we actually do have Tropical Storm or Hurricane Helene on the way.
Helene again.
People are going to think, well, I thought we already had that. Aren't we on another name now? What's going on? And no, it's because we didn't have Tropical Storm Helene. Just some reporter somewhere got the nuance wrong. That being said, I understand why they got it wrong. It's the system's a little bit complicated. And I'm not sure what the best way to handle it when a potential tropical cyclone that's going to cause tropical storm impacts, whether or not it's tropical actually or not. And how do you say what's coming? You say, I mean, the easiest thing to do is to say, prepare for a tropical storm, even though it might not be an actual tropical storm. No matter what form it is, it's going to cause tropical storm effects.
I've spent a lot of time this week debating on whether we fixed the problem or made it worse, because potential tropical cyclone helps solve a problem, which is what we addressed earlier in the show, which is allows them to just issue the warnings and the bulletins, but then also issues like nowhere else do we use the word cyclone. So now we're having to explain what that is.
James, we have fixed a problem in that we weren't able to handle these situations well before, in that we couldn't say, well, there's a storm coming that may or may not actually be a tropical storm, but it's going to cause tropical storm impacts. So now we can put tropical storm warnings out. Problem is, we've generated new problems that we now have to solve.
In my opinion,
in doing so, unintended consequences, they always come up.
Yes.
And that's our unintended consequence here is how to relate to the public what is truly on the way. And it's very difficult. I'm not sure what the best way is, but it's very difficult to fit a storm's coming that may or may not be a tropical storm, but it's going to act like one into a headline. You put that into 6 words.
As a headline writer, yes. Mandy on Facebook is asking, are we answering any questions live? Yes, we are, because she's asking, is this going to affect Charleston, South Carolina? This storm's not, because this one on your screen right now is the one from Monday and Tuesday, but there is a storm, or could be a storm, brewing out there coming up on the other side of this break. We're going to talk more with Frank about what we can expect as we continue through the peak of hurricane season. We will also check in with Sam Walker out on the Outer Banks, because while we've been talking this first half hour about the historic rainfall in portions of the greater Wilmington area, Tuesday's rain in the Outer Banks was also noteworthy as well. The Carolina Weather Group live on this Wednesday night continues right after this.
I'm here with my pal Chris. Chris, you had a great explainer on WCNC yesterday about why this week's storm was a potential tropical cyclone and not a tropical storm. Can you summarize that explainer for us?
It can be maddening sometimes, especially because we had tropical storm impacts. Winds were at 50 miles per hour, where a tropical storm is usually 39 to 73, right? Well, there's one detail that we're missing. It's this. The technical definition, per the National Weather Service, a tropical storm is a system of clouds and thunderstorms with a defined center of circulation, sustained winds, as we just mentioned. That's the problem. It didn't have a defined center. So at that point, you had actually the stronger winds that are away from the center of circulation. So by definition, it actually was not a tropical storm. So even though it had all the impacts, James, it is maddening, because it's really tough to see oftentimes, and they're so particular, so specific about this, but this brings up the point. A name is just a name. We saw how much rain fell. It was 18 inches in some areas, really a range of anywhere from 8 to a foot of rain. And then you had the winds up to 50 miles per hour. That was a tropical storm. It was just a storm in general. So yeah, even though it wasn't technically Tropical Storm Helene, we're splitting hairs here as far as the definition goes.
It'll go down. The history book says the storm that was not Helene. Well, in the WCNC Hurricane Special that just aired on TV, Jim Cantori talks about the thing that is most memorable to him so far this season is how many PTCs, potential tropical cyclones, we have had, and how that speaks to rapid intensification with these things forming right off the coast. So if you missed Chris and the gang, it's over on the WCNC Weather IQ YouTube channel and WCNC Plus, playing at 10 p.m. tonight. So when you're done here, you can hop over there.
Oh, I look forward to it. And of course, if you're not subscribing to this guy, follow this channel too.
Have you ever seen what an indoor environmental assessment looks like in a commercial building or business? During a full assessment, we collect data throughout the building and compare the measurements room to room. We can also collect samples that go to a lab, such as the small cassette shown here, which will be analyzed for types and amounts of mold in the air. We follow up with a physical inspection, looking for moisture sources and using moisture meters to determine if any of your building materials are wet.
Go-ESG.com or 336-373-1538. Welcome back to the Carolina Weather Group. James Brereton here in Charlotte. Frank Strait in Columbia. We've got the 7-day tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center. We've got what was Gordon out there continuing to just kind of hang out with the fish. But I think, Frank, your attention is really focusing on what is kind of hatched into the Gulf there. A mere, what is it? 30% chance of development over the next 7 days. But what can we maybe expect with this?
That's right. We're code yellow right now on the Northwest Caribbean thing. Come back to that in a second briefly. The orange thing out in the middle of the Atlantic right now is what used to be Gordon, Tropical Storm Gordon, but weakened to a depression that's now weakened to just a little swirl of cumulus clouds and spotty showers. However, there's a 60% chance of that, or 50, the National Hurricane Center has, of that becoming Tropical Storm Gordon again as it moves northward. However, as you can see on the trajectory it's taking, it's not going to be a problem for us in the Carolinas. Unless it became much stronger than we expected. If it turned into a Category 2 hurricane or something, it could send ocean swells our way to cause beach and boating problems. But that seems to be a long shot. It's not coming anywhere near us. Now, as for this potential thing we have in the Northwest Caribbean, let me see if I can find a satellite view here of that area. There we go. to show you how there's absolutely nothing happening in that area right now. There's a few thunderstorms over the southwest Caribbean that are dying at this hour. And aside from that, nothing's happening. And the reason is because currently there is large-scale sinking motion over the Caribbean Sea and over most of the Atlantic. That's why Gordon has been struggling, because it's been moving through that same area. And if you're a subscriber to the weather alerts that I put out for DNR every Friday, and oftentimes more frequently, you're familiar with the Madden-Julian oscillation that is the cause of this. And as long as we have the Madden-Julian oscillation in the phase that it's in now, which is causing all this sinking air over the Atlantic basin, we're not going to see many tropical cyclones form, and the ones that we do see, like Gordon form, they're going to struggle. However, the computer models are indicating, and there's reason to believe they might be correct, that the Madden-Julian oscillation, which has kind of been a standing wave most of the last 6 weeks since we saw Debbie and Ernesto move through this part of the world. It's kind of been in a standing wave, and we've been in the area where there's been sinking air. Well, it looks like that pattern is going to break down, and the Madden-Julian oscillation is going to start doing what it normally does, which is drift eastward in time. So the sinking air moves east over Africa, and rising air associated with the active convectively thunderstorm-speaking phase moves over the Atlantic, and a quick transition to that. And at the same time, it looks like low pressure might form over Central America, wobble its way out over the Caribbean Sea, and result in a tropical cyclone forming in that area next week. So that's step one in the process. And there's uncertainty there because computer models have shown for about a month now that the Madden-Julian oscillation will start behaving itself, and the sinking air moves away and rising air moves in about a week. And it's been saying that will happen for about a month. Hasn't really happened, has it? So we have to take even that bit that the computer models are showing us with a grain of salt. Okay, now suppose that they're right, though, and they might well be, since they're all in a good agreement. There's a good chance they're right, that we'll see the conditions suddenly become more favorable and very quickly have something spin up in that area over the next week. So what happens then? Well, let's look at the GFS, and I need to pick a different region here so that we can see this, what's going to happen. By the way, this gives me a chance to plug Tropical Tidbits. This is coming from a great site to look at computer model data output from, and see what these models are showing, if you're really into that. But just keep in mind that expert interpretation is required. Computer models are not forecasts. Now, let's kind of step forward. We were at the initialization time from this morning at first. There we go. Here's Sunday with a little cluster of thunderstorms over Central America and the Western Caribbean. And by this point, and over time, it's persistent. Low pressure forms. This morning's GFS run shows a tropical cyclone eventually evolving there. By the way, the waters are really warm over the Caribbean Sea right now, and not just at the surface, but you go down 1,000 feet and they're still really warm. So there is a ton of energy in the waters of the Western Caribbean Sea right now that a tropical cyclone could take advantage of and spin up quickly. The waters are also warmer than average over the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, where this thing, the GFS anyway, is saying it's saying it's going to track. And so there's a fairly high ceiling once something forms, and if the MJO cooperates and doesn't continue to suppress tropical cyclone development, well, then again, the ceiling's pretty high, and you could actually have a halfway decent hurricane coming through the Gulf of Mexico. Again, if the GFS is to be believed, that's what it's telling us. It may or may not be right, but that's what it's telling us. Now, the GFS, this particular run of the GFS takes it off the East Coast and deepens it quite a bit there, but then almost harmlessly takes it out to sea. To use a Douglas Adams phrase, mostly harmless. That there would be a lot of beaches being churned up and dangerous rip currents and dangerous marine conditions along the Carolina coast if this computer model, this run of the GFS turns out to be correct. I can guarantee you that it will not be. At least one thing will be wrong about it. There's always at least one thing wrong about each computer model run. and oftentimes there are a lot of things wrong. So let's keep that in mind. Now, other computer models, let's see, pretty sure the Canadian model showed, let me back things up here, showed a somewhat different solution, which would have significant impacts in the Carolinas if the Canadian model turns out to be right. There'd be a lot of rain, especially over western North Carolina, upstate South Carolina. Maybe even double digits if this model run turned out to be right. There'd also probably be a tornado outbreak if this computer model turned out to be right with the track and intensity of this particular storm. European model has yet a different solution, though. Where's the Euro? There we are. Again, back things up to the early part of the run. And then first thing, the European model takes longer for things to get going down there. That's the 18Z run. It only goes out to 90 hours. Let me switch to the 12Z run. Oh, there it is. Now, back to the 12Z run here. So it goes out far enough that it's actually valuable for us here. There's the low pressure forming over Central America into the Bay of Campeche. Over the western Gulf of Mexico, it stays weak and goes into Texas and Louisiana instead of comes toward the Carolinas. Nothing happens here. That's also a reasonable possibility. All of the models that I just showed you are all reasonable possibilities of what can happen. So the bottom line here is we really don't know for sure what's going to happen a week or so from now. The computer models hint that we may have to deal with a tropical cyclone. And if it does, if one does indeed form, and it looks like it probably will, there's a chance it comes this way. There's also a chance that it could be highly impactful, but we're talking at this point, at this range, about a chance of a chance of a chance. So
you're saying,
the actual
what you're
possibility at this range of us having to deal with a major event seem pretty low still.
So you're saying there's a potential.
Yeah, not only am I saying, I'm not just saying there's a chance. I'm saying there's a chance of a chance. I think there's a chance of a chance of a chance.
Stay tuned. That's a tune in if I've ever heard one.
Right. But that actually is the bottom line. Do stay tuned, because there is a realistic possibility that a major wind and rain event, and tornado event, could occur in a week or so. So do stay tuned. Stay in touch with the weather. Also, make sure that your disaster preparations are in order. Visit ready.gov if you're a South Carolinian. SCEMD has hurricane.sc to be your go-to for hurricane prep. And they also have earthquake.sc, and there's also winter storm prep and tornado prep information. They got it all over there. They do a real good job with that over there.
One at a time, please.
Yeah, I'm just gonna give them all the free plugs because they deserve it, because they do a great job.
Don't say the snow word yet. But to your point, and I finally found the photo I was looking for the first half of the show. If this is what an unnamed storm can do stay tuned, because this picture from North Carolina this week of what Not-Helene did just reminds us that, name or no name, the impacts could be real, and we still have quite a ways to go in the hurricane season. We are just barely on the other side of the hill.
Right. We're like, if it were a football game, the analogy is like, we're 4 minutes into the third quarter right now.
Yeah. If I could get my keyboard to type, I would gladly put up the lovely chart. Here it comes to show everybody how that peak of the season right there at about September 10th, at least climatologically speaking, too many syllables in that word. You can see, as Frank said, we've just entered the third quarter. Hey, if there's a silver lining, I think by now we thought it was going to be all hell's breaking loose. So, if the Atlantic wants to keep this pace, that's not necessarily a bad thing either.
Well, let's to be honest, James, all hell kind of did break loose in a small area of North Carolina.
This is true. This is true.
About a month ago, or 6 weeks ago, all hell kind of did break loose in parts of Florida and Georgia, and especially South Carolina, from all the rain from Debbie. Louisiana kind of had all hell break loose a few weeks ago from Francine. So
this is correct. I guess what I was fearing, and I hope I'm not jinxing it, is I think back to 2020 when we had like 3, 4, or 5 named things out there simultaneously. I'm gonna find some wood to knock on.
Right. I'm glad that hasn't happened. We were afraid things like that would happen this year, but things haven't exactly gone the way we expected. Although, can't stress it enough, they've already seen it this year. It only takes one. Suppose, and it's happened before. There were only one tropical cyclone that formed in a season. That's happened before. Suppose that one tropical cyclone is a Category 5 that hits Georgetown, South Carolina.
Right.
It only takes the one, and we've already had the one in South Carolina and in North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're absolutely right, Frank. If you were impacted by this week's rain, if you were impacted by Debbie, the other analogy I was thinking of as we're talking about all of these terms is if you were impacted earlier this year by the severe thunderstorm that hit Rock Hill that hashtag was not a tornado, it doesn't matter what it was called or what the context was, it still impacted you.
Mm-hmm. Had a lot of impact. Oh, and while we're on the subject of it only takes one, there could easily be two in a year. I mean, even two hurricanes. South Carolina 4 times has had 2 hurricane impacts in the same year. It goes back to 1851 in the historical record we have. And once, both of them were major hurricanes. In 1893, the Sea Islands hurricane, the Charleston hurricane that year, both were majors.
Yep.
Imagine how bunkers we'd be going if something like that happened today.
I'd rather not think about it.
No, I don't want to think about it either.
Well, as Frank and Bob and I have been talking about the impacts from the tropical-like weather that impacted the Carolinas this week, we had a chance to catch up with journalist Sam Walker out on the Outer Banks because while so much was focused on Monday, heavy rain on Tuesday continued to bring impacts. Here's that conversation from last night. Joining me now from the Outer Banks is Sam Walker. Sam, welcome back to the Carolina Weather Group.
Thanks. Glad to be back again. Unfortunately,
I know we had you on to talk about excessive rainfall events, the threat of coastal flooding, the threat of flash flooding, excessive rainfall events, not, 2-3 weeks ago. And here you are again, an event this week showing us the force of Mother Nature. So what did you guys see this week with the storm that is not named Helene?
Well, we saw what I like to say is we just call it Monday on the Outer Banks. It's wind, overwash, surf you can't get into, the washing machine, a spin cycle in full effect out there. But not a lot of rain. That was one thing about Monday was it was all just wind and surf for us. And we had the overwash. Tuesday is when the bottom fell out. And, thinking about what we've gotten, and again, recording this as the event is winding down where I live in Currituck County, we got 7 inches of rain over the last couple of hours, not the 22 that they got on the opposite corner of the coast yesterday or Monday. So, this is a different one for us. I think it's a different one for everybody because 1, it never got named.
Yeah.
2, it was a wind and overwash event for us to start and then turn into a rain event. Now, it's not to say we haven't had that before where we've seen a hurricane move through off, one that's made landfall somewhere else come through and then backside us. I go back to Hurricane Bonnie did that. One of the situations where it passed off the coast of us, or passed to our east, and then backside swung around a rain band that did some nasty damage. Actually, tree fell on a house here in Currituck and killed a young girl. So, we see these every time. And we always talk about how everyone's different. This one was different by all means, obviously.
I think your parallel to Bonnie is spot on because Monday was the big event for a lot of folks, but there were lingering impacts into Tuesday, and that is almost where you guys got hit harder, at least with the rain. So what has been some of the results, some of the impacts of that, what the Weather Service deemed considerable flash flooding?
We've seen roads that normally flood in a good afternoon thunderstorm with up to a foot, maybe even 2 feet of water. There's some video that I've got from Sanderling area, which is the north end of Duck, right on the Currituck-Dare County line on Highway 12. Vehicles in the ditches there. They're having to bypass traffic through one of the parking lots of the Sanderling Resort. All the way down Highway 12 on that stretch from Kitty Hawk up to Corolla. Think of the Outer Banks, the middle of the Outer Banks is like being in a bowl or in a trough. You've got the dunes on the east side that were man-made actually in the 1920s and 30s. I bet you didn't know that. But you've got that, but then you've got this natural rolling dunes that go back into the maritime forest on the sound side. This whole area is like that, and really Highway 12 kind of runs through that. It does wind right along the edge of the Currituck Sound on this end in Duck and Southern Shores, really in Duck and then on up to Corolla. So it's kind of sits in a trough, and all the water drains down these streets from the east. They drain down from the west, and where does it collect? In the trough. And it just so happens that is the main road in and out for the northern Outer Banks. Again, Southern Shores, Duck, Corolla. So those areas have seen it where we've got 1 foot, foot of water, maybe even 2 feet in some deep spots. I've heard some of the neighborhoods are in these rolling hills, and these rolling hills are, it's maritime forest. It's similar to the Piedmont. It's crazy how you can go into parts of Southern Shores and Duck and feel like you are actually in the Piedmont, just because of the elevation changes that go on. But those areas where you've got those swales, the water is collecting. Now, here's the thing. One, it doesn't move, so you don't have that flash flood that we talk about. When we say flash floods out here, it's not rapidly moving water. It's a lot of water in a short amount of time. It's still going to cause damage. It's still going to, flood houses. It's still going to overflow pools. It's going to end up, again, people run off the road and into a ditch. Not so much where the water, their vehicle gets moved off the road. So we have seen that tonight with this, 6, 7, 8, maybe even as high as 10 inches just offshore of Corolla, according to Wakefield's radar estimates tonight. So that end is really taking a savage beating from the heavy rains today.
Have we lost any more structures during this storm?
No, thankfully, no full structures. Saw quite a few stairways and decks come off of houses in the Rodanthe area on Hatteras Island. That's been the major focus really for the last 4 years. And we've lost 7 houses up there in the last 4 years alone. But these are houses that are not occupied. They're still owned. They're still got furniture in them, and just you could go back in there if you get a septic tank that works and get a water and power hooked back up. Rent it. But that's the problem. They've had their septic tanks have been compromised, so they've been condemned by Dare County, so they can't be occupied. And for the most part, disconnect the power, shut off the water. But because of, you got for the insurance to kick in, you got to let it fall in the ocean. Well, of course, what's that do? It creates a mess. So, no, we did not see any collapse. The Rodanthe area is where the main focus is in, with about 20 right now that are still considered. And several of these are in the process. The owners are in the process of getting ready to move. I mean, we could go into that as well. But yeah, Rodanthe, we didn't have any houses collapse there. Again, other than some decks that came off and have washed up on Merlot Beach to the north, scattered along the beach. So nothing major there. Down in Buxton, we've got the same situation, just north of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. If you've ever been down there and you come in on Highway 12, we call it the motels. There's several motels right there as you come into the village, off out of Cape Hatteras National Seashore. Lighthouse is off into the distance, and you come into the village, and the water always runs under the motels, the Cape Hatteras Motel. There's a neighborhood there. It's on Old Lighthouse Road. All those houses, they've got sandbags in front of them. They've got no beach right now. Dare County is going to probably getting the process of doing a beach nourishment project there in 2 years. So we've had there, it's just water poured in, ocean water into that neighborhood in the old Lighthouse View neighborhood. But just to the south of that is a former Coast Guard and Navy base. And really it was a Navy base before it was a Coast Guard base. It was actually a Cold War submarine listening post. They had Sonos. Yeah, it had Sonos gear that was all the way out in the ocean, and the buildings were torn down, but the foundations were left. And under those foundations and in the ground was contaminated soil from fuel. And that stuff has been washing up over the last year. That stuff has been exposed. All this infrastructure, this contaminated soil, that's all been underwater for the last 3-4 days. I didn't get to the fact. We talking about what's just happened. This has been something going on for 2 weeks now, and we can talk about that in a moment. But so we're still getting some word down there. The Corps of Engineers is on scene now after being told for last year that this contaminated soil's out there and it smells like diesel fuel if you go out, and there's about a quarter-mile stretch of beach that's closed, including the best known, most popular surf spot on the East Coast. You can't go in the ocean there. So a lot of situations going on here.
Sam, it's good to talk with you. You can find him at samwalkerobxnews.com, and hopefully that water drains off nicely and we get a breather here before the next swing.
James, thanks so much.
Thanks to Sam Walker for his time. Back live now with you. James and Frank are here in the last few moments of the show. Frank, any lessons learned, any things that will stay with us after the weather this week?
Well, we did learn that we have a couple of new problems that we have to deal with in communicating the impacts of weather, as you said, in dealing with these potential tropical cyclone situations. So that's one thing. We also have to remember that while we may be good at forecasting the weather, we're not perfect, and the weather will humble you sometimes, and that I think that's happened to us this weekend or back on Monday yet again, and it will happen some more. So while we like to stand up and be confident all the time, we also have to competently relate uncertainty, or else sometimes we're going to sound a little foolish.
I think that is well spoken. Thanks to Bob. Thanks to Sam. We have actually even more from Sam that we'll be posting to our Patreon page. So if you want to support the show and unlock some additional content, well, you can join the names of people scrolling across the bottom of your screen right now at patreon.com/Carolina Weather Group. And for just $1, help keep the lights on. Matter of fact, I think Frank told me he needs a new light stand. So if you want to buy Frank a new light stand, patreon.com/Carolina Weather Group. And don't forget to come join us at the Upstate South Carolina Weather Fest. It's Saturday, October 5th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the GSP Airport, just across the street from the National Weather Service there in Greenville, Spartanburg. We will be at the airport. You can come hang out with your favorite local media, emergency responders, meteorologists, and I'm most looking forward to, Frank, the weather balloon launch that they will be doing. Family fun activities and food trucks Saturday, October 5th, there in upstate South Carolina.
You had me at food trucks.
I should have just led with that. Forget the weather balloon. There's food trucks.
Yep. And if that's that Polish food truck that you see around Charleston sometime takes the drive up there, Melissa will be very happy about that.
I'm sure you can make
She's
a request.
a definite fan of pierogies.
Who is it? Who is it? I'm going to leave it there. I don't know how else better to end the show.
Except I said it wrong. It's pierogi. That's plural. One of the things I learned up north.
The more you know. Frank, good to see you. We are looking at the anniversary of Hurricane Hugo this weekend, 35 years since that historic storm came in. So pending any sort of significant tropical development, which is a potential, we are going to be bringing our Hurricane Hugo episode back to our feed. So get subscribed for that if you haven't seen it.
Friendly reminder, everyone, the average return period for a major hurricane in South Carolina is about 34 years.
I'm hanging up now. If only you can hang up a phone.
Hopefully, and it may well be 34 more years before another major hurricane affects South Carolina, and I hope that's how it works out, because I will be long retired, hopefully with a great grandchild bouncing on my knee.
That's a much nicer thought. We'll end on that.
Mm-hmm.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, y'all.